Peter. Right, so it says 3:30 on my clock, so maybe maybe my clocks are wrong. I'll let you off.
I've got the adventurous clock. It sort of speeds things along.
You're a minute ahead. Yeah. Good afternoon. I've swapped out of my rule polo shirt and into a normal t-shirt to talk about some products and updates from Elesar. So I'm going to try and share my screen. Pressed all the right buttons in the right order. If I click run presentation. So these are my things I'm going to be talking about today, hopefully squeezing it all into half an hour. So firstly, making a 4-point turn, not a 3-point. Make yourself a slot for the driving test center, which I see has got a 400,000 backlog of tests to perform. I'll make a 4-point turn and do it in less than half an hour. How to install a Wi-Fi hat, and then talk a bit about Textees Studio. I'm just going to minimize my Zoom window, it's getting in the way. So a little bit earlier in the year, there were some updates to CloudFS released. Now, CloudFS is a way to share photos and files across all of your devices. So, for example, if you take a photo on an Apple mobile phone, you can then pick up that photo on a Windows PC or copy it to your RISC OS computer. So all of the storage is held on a service called pCloud, which is a Swiss-based company. You can then open that in OmniClient, and it looks just like any other shared network mount like you would have for LAN-MAN-FS or for Access, that sort of thing. So the changes that came up in version 0.33 were to add support for opening mounts that are held on their EU servers. So if you're concerned that your data is held somewhere that the NSA might request access to it through the American government's rules on a US server, you can now migrate your data or create an account that's held entirely in the EU and therefore covered by the GDPR, so the more strict data protection rules that affords you. So you can now mount that directly. You used to be able to do it anyway, but it involved fiddling around with some system variables. So you can now do it all just through the OmniClient dialog box. There's also a feature that stopped working a few years ago, where if you leave a link unused for some time, so if you mount a drive and then walk off for an hour, when you came back, it would have disconnected you, believing that you were no longer using it. So there's now some keep alive logic in there that will mean that the link is kept alive over over an extended period of time. And then also some under the bonnet performance improvements and the way that the buffering works. So depending on what how your broadband connection works, that can give you up to a 300% speed increase, which was quite impressive, I felt. You can buy CloudFS. It's £24 plus VAT, so £28.80 with VAT included. And as was mentioned a little bit earlier in one of the talks, there's now a Raspberry Pi specific version of it available, which appears in Epic, so the NutPi add-on available from RISC OS Open. Another product that's seen some Profit is a complete accounting package for RISC OS, which allows you to manage your customers, suppliers in a pair of databases, and then you have a sales and a purchase ledger and ways to track your bank accounts. And then at the end of a quarter, you can generate automatically a VAT return, and then at the end of a year, your full accounting return. Now, the interesting thing about VAT, if that's a possible, it's not an oxymoron phrase. Interesting thing about VAT is that Profit also supports the Making Tax digital system, which HMRC runs in the UK, where you submit your VAT return directly into their brains rather than having to fill in the conventional green paper form, the VAT 100 form with filling in the 9 boxes. So you can submit that directly to them. So that was one of the things that got updated in version 4.08. which was to move to HMRC's new version 3 spec. They keep changing it every few months for reasons best known to themselves, and if you don't upgrade your software repeatedly, they'll at some point stop accepting your VAT return. So they've threatened to do that, but haven't actually done it yet. But it seems wise to stay one step ahead. And then a couple of feature suggestions crammed in as well. So if you're generating an invoice where you have deliberately excluded VAT, but you are VAT registered, some of the columns are now highlighted in red, so that it's a bit more obvious that you're about to send out a nonsensical invoice where VAT is hidden. And then when you're doing shortcuts, entering things into the ledger, what used to happen, the logic would be it would look one line earlier in the ledger and then add 1 to that number. But obviously, if you have multiple customers, their invoice numbers might not be sequential across all of your customers. So it will now work backwards for the previous ledger entry to that customer and add 1 to that number instead. So saving a bit of typing there. So Profit is available now. That's £79 plus VAT. Of course, VAT you can reclaim back if you're a business as well. And then the Making Tax Digital add-on is an extra £54 if you need that. So not all companies need to use Making Tax Digital yet. You can skip it if you're below the £85,000 VAT threshold at the moment. And then the other two products that got point minor upgrades with the Wi-Fi hat, so changing some of the way that the driver works internally to fix a couple of small problems, updating the network coprocessor, which is what sits on the hat doing all of the Wi-Fi magic, and then Texties, which both of these things I'm going to be talking about in a bit more detail, so I'm going to just skip over them for now. But in Texties, unbeknownst to many people, there's actually an implementation of Logo, and Logo allows you, as well as drawing pretty squares and patterns on the screen, if you ever remember using a Logo turtle at school, you can also use it for document automation within Texties. So you can, for example, get it to save the file if you click on a graphic within your document. So you can tie together, trigger an action from an object in the document and call a bit of Logo code. It's already quite clever. So on to hats instead. So this is, we've talked about software. So hat is an extension, so hardware attached on top that the Raspberry Pi Foundation came up with, where you can build standard add-on boards that clip on the top of your Raspberry Pi in a known location with a known outline. And Elesar has developed a hat which includes the WILC 1000 network coprocessor chip. So that allows us to indirectly connect your Raspberry Pi to a wireless network, even though rest of RISC OS doesn't yet know about Wi-Fi itself. It does it by a sleight of hand, pretending that it's actually a wired interface, so that the driver declares itself as though it were wired. RISC OS is none the wiser, but actually the packets end up going out through this network coprocessor onto the network. So it's pretty easy to install. If you push it onto the header and install the software and reboot, that's pretty much all there is to it. But rather than killing you with more and more slides, if I use some more magic of Zoom, it should be possible for me to show you that happening. So these are the hats in person. There's one variant of the hat that has a real-time clock chip on the top of it, and then a battery holder on the back of it. So that will store the time while it's turned off. And then there's one that's £10 cheaper, which doesn't have a clock and doesn't have a battery holder. Pretty simple distinction to make. So first thing to do, unplug the Ethernet cable. We will not be needing that again. push that onto the 40-pin header, and then you get a bundle of nuts and bolts and spacers. So you jam a spacer in to just to stop it flapping around, and then same on the other side. There are actually 4 that you're supposed to be doing here, but watching me doing up screws via Zoom isn't very exciting, so I'm only going to do 2 just to make it stable. Doing up the screws. Okay, that was the hardware being installed. No soldering required. So over in RISC OS, once you've booted up, if you open configure and go to install stuff in your boot sequence, the driver for the Ethernet, the hat, includes a few updates to boot, which you can merge with your normal boot sequence. So that's the driver and the Wi-Fi manager that it's installing. And then if you go to the network setup plugin, you'll find that there's an extra interface has been added to the list, which is the WILC 1000 network chip that I mentioned a moment ago. So turn that one on and turn off the wired Ethernet. You don't need that. And then for the most part, people will use DHCP to configure the interface. So you can enter a network address manually, but generally with Wi-Fi, you'll find reconnecting via DHCP is the most sensible. And then scary moment when the screen goes blank and the computer reboots. And when you next start up, you should find a Wi-Fi manager on the icon bar, and middle clicking on that, you get a list of all of the Wi-Fi hotspots that are in range. These are some of my neighbors' hotspots, so they've only got relatively weak signal, 14% signal strength. If you didn't know the password, you could join your neighbor's Wi-Fi and scrounge off their Wi-Fi, but my network is called Just One More Thing, and that's got a much stronger signal, 79%, because obviously it's within my house. So entering the password and clicking connect, does its DHCP thing, and then you get little green bars on the icon bar icon to show the proportional signal strength. And if you look at the hardware, when it's booted, there'll be once it's loaded the OS, there's a link light when the link is established, and then there's a small activity light that flashes whenever some data is going past. And that's pretty much it. So installing a hat, installing the software. So all pretty easy. And those have been very well received by people wanting to free themselves, or if they're out of range of the ADSL router in your house and you haven't got Ethernet in the shed that you're trying to work in. It's very handy for that. 2 options available. £52.80 for the Wi-Fi only option, so 44 plus VAT, and then, as I said earlier, the clock's an extra £10 if you need a real-time clock with battery backup. So now on to Texties. So we've done hardware, back onto software again. So Texties is actually a suite of 6 applications, originally written by Danny and Jeff at a company called Softees, and they subsequently went on to make a new company called Just Too Easy. And if you're noticing reuse of a word in all of everything that they have touched, ease is the keyword. Everything that they do that is really well thought out in terms of its ease of use. You almost don't need to know how to use something. If you think I need to move that text from the left-hand side to the right-hand side, what you do, you pick it up and you move it from the left to the right-hand side. Everything is very obvious in the way that it's been designed. It's really quite clever. So the 6 applications are desktop publisher, I guess is the main body of it, painting program, Spreadsheet, like a miniature version of Excel. Presenter, which is what I'm using to do this presentation here. And then there, for an educational audience, there's also something called Turtle, which is the logo language that I mentioned had an upgrade earlier, and Branch, which is a database for comparing and classifying objects. So the DTP is probably the sensible one to start with. Mouse anywhere on a sheet of paper and start typing. It's as simple as that. As I said, everything has been very well thought out and easy to use. If you're making something with multiple columns, for example, a magazine, you simply draw the text frame, connect them together, and then as you type, the text will flow between the frames into the columns. It's all very simple to use. If you're wanting to bring in other items from within the RISC OS desktop, for example, sprites and draw files, they can be edited either outside and then dragged in using drag and drop, or once they're in the Texties document, if you control click on it, it will reopen it in Draw or Paint respectively in an OLE session so that you can edit it outside. And then as soon as you've finished, it will then update the document correspondingly. There's also a built-in spell checker, currently only for English. There are some bits of German and French dictionaries available as well, but I haven't found anyone who's eager enough to update those yet. So at the moment, the spell checker is an English-only one. And then when you want to come to print out your masterpiece, you can even get it to do poster prints up to 9 by 9 meters, so it will automatically divide up a large artwork into smaller pieces and then give you crop marks so you know where to glue the corners back together. And it also integrates with eSpeak, so it's quite somebody who does quite a bit of proofreading. It's really easy to scan over a block of text and not notice mistakes. So I'm terrible at mixing up from and form because my brain is expecting it to say one of those two words in the sentence that I've written. So even though I might have chosen or spelt the wrong word, when I'm skim reading it, it looks correct. So playing back paragraphs out loud is a really easy way of picking up that class of mistake where the word is correct and spelt correctly, but it's been used in the wrong place. I suppose allowed and allowed would be another one. So you can, of course, integrate your text. So it imports JPEG files. I mentioned sprites and draw files earlier. Because there used to also be a cross-platform version of Texties for Windows, it will also import Windows meta files. So that's a type of vector artwork, a bit like a draw file, and Windows bitmaps. GIFs, including animated GIFs. I'm not sure how well that works over Zoom, but there is an animated bunny running there, which is integrated into my presentation. So this presentation is done in Texties, and I've just dropped an animated GIF into the page. And ACE films, which are part of the Complete Animator, which is an animation package that RComp sells. So yeah, the built-in painting package allows you to basically scribble on top of the page, so you can draw and apply effects, some of which are quite fun. The wet finger tool is quite interesting. If you've got a JPEG or something like a photo, and then use the wet smudge tool, you can blend the edges out as though you've gone over it with a watercolor brush. This is quite an interesting effect. So there's a variety of 12 effects to choose from, and various brushes and mirroring and copying operations, as you would expect from a paint package. And then if you're wanting to follow a particular color scheme, for example, you've got a house style on the way that your newsletter is written, you can keep a palette to one side and then pipette the color scheme back into the document again, so you can pipette a color from anywhere else in the desktop, which is quite handy. And then one of the other packages within the suite is Texties Table. So this is a spreadsheet package. It has basic set of calculation functions, so min and max and trigonometry and summations and that sort of thing. So I've shown there a sales breakdown by region, UK, EU, Asia, Africa, rest of world, and I've coloured the cells in with various different colouring schemes. And then the percentages are calculated from other cells in the sheet and obviously totalized to 100. So you can then generate a chart from that, and it will pick up the color scheme and show the data in various different ways. So it's all dynamically updated. If your sales for the following month changed by 10%, the chart would obviously regenerate itself. And then Textees Presenter is the thing that I'm using to show this. So there's a catch-22 situation. I've shown a set of thumbnails of the slides that you are currently watching embedded in a slide that you are currently watching. These are individually, that each of the pages appears as a Texties DTP document, so you can integrate any of the parts that I've mentioned earlier. So you can paint and you can drag graphics in, add text. Even when you're running the presentation, if I pick the red pen tool, I can then freehand scribble on the page while I'm doing the presentation, which is sometimes quite handy, or jump to an individual slide. Deselect the pen. There we go. So Textees Studio is available now. It's 32-bit compatible and runs on any version of RISC OS that you're likely to have. Oops. Lent on the mouse, scroll one page too far forward. The installer downloads the latest version from the Elesar website. So if there are minor updates, point updates like I mentioned earlier, you simply rerun the installer and it will download it again, with the home version starting at £60. Now, if I exit that, the bit that I was hoping to show, and it's literally hot off the press, and it's a shame we don't have smelly vision, because just arrived in the last couple of days is the new edition of the Texties user guide, which is a 153-page tome, including details of how to run each of the individual applications. There's the paint application. So if you prefer, or if you don't like sitting reading long PDFs of how to use Texties, there is a handy guide now available that you can scribble on with a biro or add your notes to if there's something that you've forgotten how it works. I think those were the things I was hoping to talk, and I've managed with 6 minutes to spare. So if there's any questions that we can squeeze into 6 minutes, I'll try and answer them. Bamboozled everyone.
Question from me: How does Textees Paint compare to RISC OS Paint? What's different about it?
Right. So yeah, I would class the RISC OS Paint is very much a bitmap editor, is how I would describe it. So it's good at drawing simple circles, simple squares, toggling pixels, and so forth. The thing that's in addition in Texties are the ability to apply effects. So you can, for example, there's a pen. Rather than it just drawing solid lines as Paint would do, you can have a pen that looks like a crayon. So as you start drawing, it has a crayon effect, or there's a spray can effect, which you can make have the paint will run out as you're using it. So you can do arty effects on the page. I think that's probably if I had to choose one sentence, that would be the key difference, is the ability to have a much wider palette of tools and effects than you have in normal Paint.
Okay, that's great, thanks.
Yep.
The question just came up about a crash with Texties. Am I using the right one here? Wrong one.
Yeah, so I've got the chat open now. I can see in the corner of my eye. Yes, so from David. So, okay. Textees branch. Okay, right. Yeah. So branch is the branching database that's part of Textees, where you can classify things. So, for example, if I said, "Is it a fruit?" the answer is yes, no. You can go left or right, and then does the fruit have pips? And then you eventually conclude it's a strawberry after a few branches. So that's what Textees branch is. There was I'm not sure which version you've specifically got there. But there was a version that was missing one of the crucial files, which meant that it did crash when you clicked on something. So I suspect, in answer to the question that's gone past in the chat, is that you might just need to upgrade so that the missing file gets added. Yes, I found a few of the bugs in Textees branch while updating the screenshots in the manual. I thought, oh, I wonder what happens if you click here. Oh, it crashes. I wonder why that is. And then I found, yeah, there are some effects modules and things missing. So hopefully that's all fixed now.
And I seem to remember that Texties can export to HTML, which could be useful, couldn't it?
Yes, so you can save things as web pages. Obviously, you lose some of the finessing of the positionings because it's under the bonnet. It's having to translate it into into a table. So you don't get the pixel accurate alignment as you would if you were doing it in the DTP itself. But yes, if you want a quick cheat way of doing a simple website, you could design it all in Texties DTP and then save it as HTML. Yeah.
Hi, Rob. Going back to your Wi-Fi hat.
Yep.
How difficult would it be to implement a feature that it actually shared the Wi-Fi connection? So you've got your IP address and your connection across out back onto the Ethernet port. So in effect, if you've got a Raspberry Pi with your Wi-Fi hat in a room, then you've got several other RISC OS machines that you could actually use that Wi-Fi connection.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah, a bit like bridging in Windows, when you can bridge from the Wi-Fi on a laptop and then back to Ethernet again, which I sometimes do at a show. I'll use my laptop to the hotel Wi-Fi and then connect that to a RISC OS machine. So yeah, in principle, RISC OS already supports that. So there's something called IP forwarding, which is in the Internet module. I wouldn't say that it's probably not been tested for like 10 years. It used to be used a lot in the paste set-top boxes. So at some point in history, it has been possible to forward from one interface to another. And I guess Ethernet must have done that at some point as well, because you would have had an Ethernet card and then forwarded to your IP to the Ethernet, to the rest of the Ethernet. So I think at some point in history, it did all used to exist in RISC OS. It may not work anymore. I haven't tried it recently. But yeah, IP forwarding is the term that you want. And there's a star command in the Internet module, which might still work. But I haven't tried it.
Okay, I think we're going to have to finish there because we've